Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at the astrological chart of Mackenzie Phillips. I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole, so to speak, because I started out with Melissa Gilbert, I went to Valerie Bertinelli, and then I ended up with Mackenzie Phillips all in one morning. It's just fun for me because I did read Mackenzie Phillips' autobiography. I highly recommend it. I love reading biographies and autobiographies. If they are real, if they are going beneath the surface, and certainly Mackenzie Phillips did just that. And it doesn't surprise me because she's a Scorpio. On one hand, it surprises me because Scorpios tend to be very secretive. But I feel that it's possible when people have gotten to a certain stage in their life, they might feel that they don't want to go along with the pretense any longer, that they just want to be open and maybe to be a healer, because Scorpio certainly can embody that role. And especially when it comes from hard-fought wisdom through living a very tumultuous life, that can be the best type of healer in a lot of ways. And speaking of that, Mackenzie has her Chiron, the wounded healer, in the 8th house, which is Scorpio's house. So there you go. So Mackenzie's book is called High on Arrival, and it'll go into all the details of her life. But one of the things that we have to talk about when we talk about somebody who's a Scorpio is that the house that they represent or that they rule, the 8th house, is the house of death and transformation. And transformation is a form of death, obviously. So Scorpios can, or people who have prominent planets in the 8th house, can have many different lives. They can be the phoenix rising from the ashes. Just when you think you've counted them out, they come back to prove to you that they still are alive and ticking. And there's a ferocity there. There's a survival instinct that is present with Pluto, that can really manifest as having distinct phases of life where the person is doing different things, and the outer world may look at that and say, oh, well, this is, try to define them based on what they're doing in that moment, not realizing that they've sold them short. I was thinking about Mackenzie when she was on One Day at a Time, and she got into trouble fairly early on, within a couple of years or so of her being on the show. And she got fired, but then she came back when she had kind of going back and forth. And at one point she was severely emaciated because she had a, bad drug habit. And when she left for good, she did go on to do other things. She had a child. And so she did have different things going on with her life. Her father was John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, famous group from the 60s. And she toured with him when they reformed a group. So she wasn't just totally out of the business. But then she had another show. I'm not familiar with that other show. I can't even think of the name of it, but those of you, especially if you're younger, you may have seen it. I think it was on cable. But yeah, so the point is that she is a survivor in more ways than one. And just a little background on her life. She grew up with her mother primarily, and then I think she was about 10 when she went to live with her dad in Hollywood, or wherever, Bel Air, or wherever he lived in California. And it was a very loose environment, loose meaning no discipline. So she was rolling joints for him and getting involved in drugs at a very early age, going to the clubbing at the age of, I don't know, like 13. And I think oh yeah, because when I saw Chiron in the eighth house, I thought, well, I don't know that she got sexually abused when she was a kid. There was I'll get to the situation with her father in a bit, but, when there's Chiron in the eighth, and the eighth can be about sex, there can be trauma involving sex. And I think she did get raped when she was very young, when she was out clubbing. I think that she got raped now I remember that. So that was probably a pivotal point in her life if she hadn't experienced any kind of sexual abuse before then, which sometimes people don't know. They don't realize that. Because if she was living with Papa John from the age of 10 and had all these people coming in and out of the house, you never know. But in general, that was something that she was aware of happening to her. And so that certainly is very traumatic, being that young. But one of the things I was saying about me thinking she was so cool is because there are always those girls, I mean, I'm sure there's a male equivalent, but that were always kind of like they wanted to be grown-ups. They wanted to do grown-up things, and so they would get involved with drugs early. They would, have a serious partner early, maybe get involved, sexually active at an early age. And they just seemed like they were, older and wiser. But a lot of times, if you look at their backgrounds, it probably was more likely that they came from an extremely dysfunctional environment. And in that type of situation, the sad thing is that oftentimes if the parents are not that involved in their life because of their own issues, that can certainly be, we could call that a form of abuse because it's neglect. But it's not necessarily malicious. If a parent has a drug addiction, they're not trying to hurt their child, but they're still hurting them nonetheless. Or, when I say drug addiction, I could be talking about alcoholism, obviously. So I always look to that fourth house. And the fourth house is a house of home and family. And the first house can also describe this too, the early years, but the fourth house can be the childhood. And she has in her fourth house Neptune, Mars, and the Sun. Neptune is the key here. Neptune, I have a whole video on Neptune in the fourth house. So if you have this in your natal chart, you might want to check that out because I go into it in depth. I can't do that here. But basically, this can indicate having a home environment that's full of addiction, full of disorder in one form or another. A parent with a mental illness could be a mother. Her mother, I don't think, was like that. Her mother was working while she was young, and I think that might have even been one of the reasons why she went to live with her father. Could have been something to do with the mother not being able to supervise. Not that the father did a very good job of that. But anyway, and so Neptune here can indicate a childhood where there was some kind of dysfunctional environment, a chaotic environment. And if it is connected to the mother may have some kind of delusions, or I said mental illness, but they may be living in a fantasy world of their own. Now, the moon sign, she has her moon at 0 degrees of Aries, which means it's on the cusp with Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Neptune. So I wish I could remember what she said more about her mother. I remember her mother working at the Pentagon, which was kind of interesting in its own right. And her mother comes from a lineage of I don't know if it's the Mayflower, the, very distinguished background. But anyway, I don't want to put that on her mother, but if there is something along those lines, that can get transferred to the child. So in other words, especially a daughter. So if the mother, let's say the mother has difficulty with reality, they tend to live in their own world for whatever reason, whether they were traumatized or they just simply have they're very sensitive souls, because that can also be what's that shows up here. And so that might mean that the mother transfers that belief, that the world is this cruel place, onto the child, and then they take it and run with it in one way or the other. But definitely, it stands to reason that if you have an addicted parent, that the child can emulate that very easily. And so even some people have said that the fourth house is the father, which makes no sense to me. But definitely we could say the parents. What kind of parenting did they have? We can also look to the 10th house for authority figures. She doesn't have any planets there. But that might be this very, having no boundaries, no discipline in the household. And so the kid grows up wild. Now, one thing that is very interesting, now I always thought she had the moon in Pisces. I was a little bit disappointed to find out it was in Aries, although if you watched One Day at a Time and you saw the way that she would yell a lot on the show, I bet you that was how she was to some degree in real life. Now, her rising sign is Cancer, which is very, very interesting because Cancer is a ruler of the fourth house. And, when a child has prominent Cancer placement, so it could be the sun or the moon or the rising, and they do not get proper nurturing, that can be very traumatic. Compared to if you have the sun if you have, Scorpio, not Scorpio, like Sagittarius rising or Gemini rising, where, it's a masculine sign, it's about adventure or just exploration, and you're just not, you don't need that same kind of nurturing that somebody else needs. The water signs are very sensitive, and she has, her moon is bordering on a water sign, and the moon is your emotional nature. So it could be that person who tries to act like they have this bravado, which is what Aries is all about, in this moon sign of like, hey, I can handle this. And they're really sensitive underneath the surface, and that would be the Scorpio. But the funny thing about Cancer is that it's very upfront about their sensitivity, usually. Sometimes other things can overshadow that. And we can't always predict how that's going to play out for an individual. But she probably always has wanted that kind of nurturing that she didn't get. And you have to learn how to nurture yourself, whether you get it or whether you don't. But in that fourth house, she also has Mars and she has the sun. Now, Mars can indicate a contentious home environment. Very interesting because Papa John was he was in the military, and his father was in the military. And so because he was in the military, he moved around, I believe, in his childhood. I'm not 100% on that. That might not be true that he was a military brat, but I think he was. I read this book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. If you like conspiracy theories, it talks about how all of these rock stars of the 60s, or a lot of these people, grew up in military families and moved to Laurel Canyon, and about what might, other things that might have been going on beneath the surface, very strange coincidences along those lines. And but he grew up that's why she was probably born in Virginia, because that's where I believe he came from. But the thing is that, which is big, big military area. But Mars in the fourth house, if you do come from a military family, there can be this real control that is placed over the person, or Mars can indicate, or Uranus can indicate moving a lot, where there's a lot of travel, a lot of movement. So, like an army brat type of thing. And in this particular case, I don't think that that would apply to her. But, there might have been with this Mars a sense of there being conflict within the home, of it not being harmonious in whatever way that showed up. But she has a sun here, and her sun is in conjunction with Mars. So it's kind of like a headstrong personality. And that may have been why she did I moved to California in the first place when she was 10. I can't remember why that happened, but definitely somebody like this is very when you have a conjunction between the sun and Mars, it's like being in Aries. And Scorpio is kind of like Aries too, in that sense, being ruled by Mars. But it does have differences because it also has that influence from Pluto. But this can lead to this person. It's almost like having Mars in Cancer, where they're determined to make a home for themselves, have a home. And when I was trying to find a picture that was royalty free, I found they were talking about how, I'll just read it from Wikipedia. By the age of 18, talking about Mackenzie, obviously, she moved away from home into her own $150,000 bachelor girl home in the high rent district of the Hollywood Hills. So the thing is that she was very young to buy her first house, but she obviously was driven to do that. And you can see that with Mars, is that the person, but this is for the domestic area, that they have a very strong drive to, maybe buy real estate and have that life, embody that. And she has a son here. And I think that she said that having a child saved her life, and that was what gave her that reincarnation, if you will. That was another one of her many lives. And she had this drug addiction, and she gave birth, and that helped her clean up her act. I believe that was the case, because she did have relapses. So it's not like she just got clean and sober and that was it. So that when somebody has a sun in the fourth house, whatever else they're doing, and of course, being a TV star is a pretty significant type of occupation because it's well known by other people. I shouldn't say significant, just well known. But being a mother is probably the thing that she's most proud of out of anything that she's done. And she might have even have said that. So that's very interesting, because it just goes to show that you can, start life and have some kind of a lack of something in life, and it can end up coming back to you in a good way, because especially if you pursue it doggedly, that you want this, And so even if you weren't able to get that for yourself, you're able to get it eventually. And of course, when she lived with Papa John, she was probably living in a mansion. I think he had a mansion, so it wasn't like she was slumming it or anything like that. So, she did grow up around opulence, at least for some part of her childhood and definitely her adolescence. And then looking at the money situation, she has Uranus and Pluto in that second house. I find that people who are performers and things of that nature, where they have kind of jobs where they don't get paid every week, so they do gigs. I had a client who was like that, who was a singer and had Uranus in the second house. That can be where it's kind of the money is erratic to some degree or another. So that can be a sign of, if you have this in your chart as well, that you're going to earn money in a way that is not necessarily predictable. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be, sparse. You could make a lot of money, but it just is in the kind of field where you don't get paid like that. So the entertainment field is a big one where this is happening. Also, she has Pluto here, which indicates maybe like a desire for wealth, a great desire for wealth, an obsession with wealth, wanting to earn money because the person wants to have it. Now, Pluto is one of the rulers of Scorpio, like I said, so it's going to play into her basic nature as well. And so the idea with Pluto and Scorpio can be power, of realizing, hey, there are a lot of things in life that, make me feel powerless, but at least if I have a lot of money, then I'll feel like I'm in control to some degree. And so I don't know how that plays out in her life. It's no surprise that she had a love of singing in the third house, which is the house of communication. And it can be, when you're talking about an actress, that she has to project her voice and things like that. But also because she was she wrote that book and she wrote it herself. So she has Venus and the North Node, and they are in conjunction. So the North Node is your soul's mission. And Venus can be the arts. So just by virtue of that alone, forget about what house it's in. It can be somebody who's born to be an artist, to do creative work, whether it's acting or singing, but also writing, because this is the third house, and the fact that the North Node is there can indicate that this is what she was meant to do, and that this is going to benefit other people. This book is very honest, brutally honest about, her life and the struggles that she had. And people came out, one of the things that she mentioned was that her father took advantage of her sexually when she was under the influence, when she was 18. So, incest, the greatest taboo of them all. Scorpio, 8th house, all about taboos. But healing, Chiron in the 8th, that saying, you're only as sick as your secrets. Bringing that into the light of day and having the sunlight disinfect it, and then having other people who have had similar experiences come out and say, thank you for bringing up this topic of great shame in our society. So that book that she wrote, that, a lot of celebrities write autobiographies, that may have had a particularly important, it may have been particularly important for her in her lifespan, in this incarnation, for her to do that, compared to other people. Also, looking at her North Node in and of itself, it is in the sign of Libra. So there you go. There's that artistic or musical ability. It's very interesting. I was just curious about the third house. I thought that could have something to do with singing, since it's about communicating. And they were talking it's just kind of like a little an aside here, that they were saying for music that Neptune is perhaps the most important planet when it comes to singing ability. I did not know that. I would assume it had to do because Taurus is associated with its rule. It rules the throat, and it's connected to singing, and so I just assumed it was like Taurus. And and funny that Valerie Bertinelli is a Taurus, and Mackenzie is the singer. And so that's very important. But also in her fifth house, she has Jupiter and Mercury. So Mercury is the ruler of the third house and has to do with the mind, literary pursuits, again, communication. And Jupiter here, so it's in a, should be in a conjunction, I would imagine. Yeah. So luck through communication and through this acting, which can be the fifth house, any kind of creative self-expression. Just having luck in that. And I think she had something lucky when it came to American Graffiti, which was her first role. And I can't remember what the whole story was and how she was discovered. And she was in that role. And she was very, it was very brief. I don't think she had a big part in that. And that led to One Day at a Time, I believe. So, so sometimes these things happen and, somebody gets discovered or they launch a career on a minor part like that. And so definitely, if you want to call it luck, that plays a part in it. In her sixth house of work, she has Saturn. This can indicate somebody with a good work ethic. And when you're a child actor, you have to have a good work ethic in order for it to, in order for you to survive in the business. And that was one of the reasons why she got fired, because she was allowing her private life to interfere with her public life. And yet, that did not do her in. I actually went back to Wikipedia. I was just like refreshing my memory. And then they mentioned 90210. How could I forget? She starred in that. I think she played a drug counselor or something. So she kind of had launched a comeback by being on a very popular show of the 90s, Beverly Hills 90210. So there's one of those lives again, that having multiple lives. And the thing about Saturn in the sixth house is that it can be very, I was going to say sacrificial. That's not quite what I meant. What I meant is that this is the house of service, and Saturn when somebody has Saturn in the sixth house, they may even have had a past life as a slave or a servant. So sometimes their mentality when it comes to work is just, do whatever it takes. Now, I can't say that about Mackenzie, because she certainly has, when you're in show business, whatever you're doing, whether it's, a top 10 TV show, or if you're just touring with a band that is another incarnation of a famous band, it doesn't really matter, because it is still kind of like a vagabond lifestyle, and it's non-traditional. So it's not something that I associate with Saturn in the sixth house necessarily. But I look at the symbol of Saturn, and it looks like an anchor. And so regardless of what else is going on in the person's life, at the very least, they may be somebody who values working. And that can be very important if you have an addiction, because it can be a saving grace. If you don't have a good work ethic and you're an addict, that can just lead to total disillusion. If you have that strong belief that you should be productive, then you probably will be, because you'll probably, seek out opportunities to do so because it's very, very important to you. So that may have been another reason besides her child, which kept her going and allowed her to eventually conquer her demons. And I can't remember, I think she was actually a counselor for a while, just helping people in the public. That reminds me. Now I think I'm going to do Christy McNichol, because Christy McNichol was a child star who eventually, I think she became a hairdresser, and she was big in the 70s. It's just amazing. I have so much respect for these people, especially when they were famous when they're young. So it's like pretty much all they know, and then they suddenly become regular civilians, and when they just do regular types of jobs. Gary Coleman, I think, became a security officer, and Dana Plato, I think, worked in a video store or something. So those are well publicized, situations. But a lot of times the assumption is that, they fell on hard times, they couldn't get work in Hollywood, so they were forced to do that because they didn't have any other money. I think in Mackenzie Phillips' case, she might have been, had a hard time finding work at that point because of her problems staying sober. However, she also wanted to give back, I'm sure, and she eventually went back into into show business. So it wasn't the end for her. So that just shows her resilience and also her different lives that she has lived. And definitely when you're a fixed sign like Scorpio, you can have that stability even amid a lot of drama in your life, and that can serve you very well. And I also think it's great that she has these inner planets in or points, in the case of the rising sign, in cardinal modality, because that can make the person a go-getter, take the initiative, which you have to do, especially in a situation like show business where you don't have, it's not like somebody else is guiding you. You have to go after what you want a lot of times. So kudos to her for that. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is that 9th house where she has the moon. And that's very interesting. I don't remember in her autobiography if she talked about her spirituality. I assumed that she had a moon in Pisces, so I thought that maybe that was just a natural thing for her. But she does have these water signs. She's got Mars in Scorpio, the Sun in Scorpio, and they're in conjunction. That's a fierce conjunction. Try to stop somebody with that conjunction, or, keep them down for long. And of course, Cancer rising, so that water element is strong in her chart here. Very good for acting and kind of disappearing into different roles, but also highly intuitive and highly sensitive. And I think that especially with the Cancer energy, that hurt feelings, when somebody has Cancer rising, they can be easily hurt. And she doesn't come across that way to me, that she's hypersensitive, but maybe the Aries moon kind of overshadows that. And it's interesting. I guess Valerie Bertinelli has Scorpio rising. So these people that I did not think were all that, sensitive, who seem kind of fiery more than the sensitive type of nature, turned out to have water as their ascendant. And Yeah, very interesting. So the moon in the ninth house can give you a very uh, devout, devoutly religious nature. And it may not be, the traditional religions. Maybe it's, I've done a video on this already. And if you have this in your placement, you might want to check that out because it's a longer video and just going into that. And I think that was the placement where they said about being connected to deities, for instance. So having kind of visions of, an archangels or whatever, and then really having that strong connection. Somebody who's a born again Christian who feels like a strong connection with Jesus would be an example of this because there is an emotional component where the person wants to have a personal relationship or wants to to feel to generate emotion when they are communing with God. Now, someone might say, oh, that's true of everybody, but that's not the case. Some people, like a Buddhist, is very cerebral and wants that kind of intellectual understanding of what is the nature of reality. But in yoga, we would say this person would be a bhakti yogi who is devotional, and just wants to feel when they're involved in their spiritual practice, and like gospel music, for instance, that can give you this. It can, really touch your heart chakra when you're listening to that type of music, or in the Indian music, the bhajans, So anyway, I think I'll leave it there, but certainly very interesting. And I hope that you enjoyed this. If you would like a private reading, please click on the link below. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.